So here we have our PSD file. Go up to the tab, like I've suggested in class, so that we can separate it. There we go. So we have that as a free floating window. So now I'm going to the magnifier. I can either magnify to zoom in or to zoom out. And I want to zoom out because I want to actually have a border that I can work within, and you will see why. So there's my original layer. It is the original image imported. I'm going to make a copy of it, and there you see it. And now I'm going to take the original and put it behind my black, white, and blank layer, so I always have the original. I'm going to rename this as original scale, and this is the layer that I will actually start sizing and scaling. I will go up to edit, come down to transform, go over to scale function, and you'll notice that the bounding box has handles. When I put my cursor over the handles, it gives me a forward and backward arrow indicating that I can scale in any direction. Depending on the Photoshop you have, to keep it proportional, with an older Photoshop version you need to hold down Shift, and some of the new Photoshop updates you do not have to hold down Shift. I'm now bringing over a guideline from the ruler. I want to start straightening my image. I can tell on the candlestick with the guideline that this is not quite perfectly vertical. So now I'm going to make another copy of that layer. That is my scaling layer. Now I'm going to rename this layer my rotation layer, because I'm going to actually begin to rotate it using the transform function. I go back up to edit in my menu bar, come down to transform, I select rotate, and now you'll notice at the handles I have a turning arrow, an arrow that indicates a twisting and turning and rotating function. So I'm going to start rotating my image using the guideline to make sure that the candlestick is vertical. As I'm doing that, you can see that I'm crooked on my boundaries of the image. So the next step will be to scale the image appropriately. I go back to transform, I click scale, and I start scaling to get the background full raster of my canvas. There we go. I'm going to continue checking with the guideline to see if do I really have this vertical. I'm not quite sure, so I probably will adjust it a little bit more. And you'll just see me going back and forth between scaling and rotate to get it vertical and to the position that I think is most pleasing. Okay, I'm going to rotate it a little bit more just to get that line centered within my candlestick so that I know I'm as vertical as I can be. Okay? Now I'm moving it a little close to the edge. I want to start creating the aesthetic, perhaps the thirds principle of this image, incorporating the shadow, the apple, the candlestick, using these all as elements of design. I'm going to scale again because I just want to fine-tune things. There we go. You can see that I'm seeing part of the edge again. I want to be clear of the shadow being cut off, and I want a little more space on that side of the candlestick and the edge. Now, I'm going to use my smudge tool to eliminate a little bit of the edge of the seamless. When I shot this in my room, you can see the edge of the paper. I'm adjusting the tooltip of my smudge. See how I increase the number? The tool gets larger. And I'm going to use this smudge tool to gently push at 100% of strength to just push the material of the white background to get rid of the black edge. Okay? I use the smudge tool to actually move visual material, and I saved. Okay, so now I have an original scale, an original rotate layer. I duplicated my rotate layer. I am now going to start doing some color corrections. You'll see the value of keeping each of these layers separate so that I can always go back. So this is going to be called color correction 1. Now I'm going to go up to my image, come down to adjust, going to go to color balance. We could agree that this image is a little too warm, so I'm going to start pulling out the yellows, pulling out the reds, starting to make my background whiter. Always looking at the color to see what is most appealing, not necessarily what is most accurate, but what is most appealing. Just feel free to always play with the functions, look at the parameters, the subtleties, and begin to just let your eye make the final decision, not necessarily a number. However, you can start thinking in your head that certain numbers are parameters at which you want to begin targeting. Okay, I'm satisfied with that color correction to begin with. Now I'm going to duplicate that layer and do some additional corrections such as contrast. Contrast and brightness do very nice effects, and I'll play with them both to see if I can get the image to a level of aesthetics that I prefer. Watch what's happening. Combining contrast and brightness allow you to do a myriad of effects to your image. So I have an original scale, original rotate, color correction, contrast, and I'm going to add now a new layer where I will adjust levels. I'm working with the contrast adjusted layer. I'm going to my levels. There's the histogram that we talked about in class. Look what happens when I slide black triangle on my histogram. Things begin to change. Now I'm working with the middle gray triangle. Feel free to always gradually and drastically make changes to see what the differences are. Okay, now I'm starting to be pleased with the look of it in terms of my background, but maybe I don't quite like what's happening to the apple. So I'm clicking on and off to see the differences between all the adjustments I've made so far. I think I want to work with this apple, but I want to work with this background. Okay? So I'm happy with that apple, but not happy with the apple with the final background adjustments. So I'm going to start cutting holes. I'm going to my ellipse marquee. I'm changing my feathering to 287, and as I draw you can see that it just kind of gives me a very soft edge. I keep drawing, centering, because I'm going to create a very, very feathered edge. Now, notice what level is highlighted, the levels layer. I am going to delete or clear the area that is selected. Watch what happens. If we look at the layer, we can see that there is now a small white hole. We're looking through it. See the difference as I click the layer, the background layer, on and off. So I cut a hole in our levels so that I can see the apple in the color correction layer. Now I'm going to use an erase tool to gently erase a little bit more out of the hole that I cut in the levels layer. So I'm adjusting the size of my eraser tool. Notice that I have, for opacity of the tool, 17% and flow rate at 17%. In other words, I'm erasing very lightly, not drastically. I'm gradually, by layer upon layer of erasing, just softening the edge and showing a bit more of the apple through the levels layer to the color correction layer that I prefer. So I'm just erasing ever so carefully parts of that hole, which is a little window. You can see the difference now. I want to see the apple on the color correction layer through the levels layer, which gives me the background I prefer. Now I'm going to save again, something you want to do quite frequently. Keep watching our history tab, our history window, because it's good to see all the functions are doing. Now I'm copying my background layer that I prefer, but I want to add a gentle blur to it so that it begins to be softer, allowing the apple and the candlestick to be more accurately sharp. Watch the effect. As I increase the number, you can see the blur, and you can also see the hole. We're seeing the crisp apple through, but I'm beginning to blur the layer that I want as my background. Let's go with 17.7. The shadow is soft, the seamless line is soft, the candlestick is soft, but I want to change that. So I'm actually going to cut a hole with my lasso tool with a 37 feathering function. 37 pixel. I'm going to change it. I'm going to go to 87 to give it a little bit more of a feather. Now I'm going to just draw with my lasso a shape. You can see that it has angles, but because I've feathered it, it will be a nice soft boundary. When I click, you'll see that it's soft. Now I'm going to go to that layer, make sure it's highlighted. There, you can see the difference. There's the blurred layer, there's the background layer. Blurred background. I'm going to cut a hole in the blurred so that the apple and the candlestick are sharper, but the background is blurred. I will clear. There. You can see the difference. I just began to cut a hole. I'm going to clear again, which takes a little bit more of the feathered edge. I'm going to do it a third time. It's gradually taking away a bit more of the blur, making it very, very soft, a very, very soft boundary. I'm going to deselect my lines, and now I'm going to look closely and see there are still areas of the candlestick that I want to see sharp. So I'm going to gradually erase some of my blurred layer to see the sharp candlestick through on the following layer below. So I'm gradually erasing some of that blurred window, very carefully erasing just small portions at a time at 17% of opacity and at 17% of flow rate. That means the power of my erase tool. And I'm just gradually erasing away the blur over the candlestick because I want it very sharp, but the background blurred and the shadow blurred. I'm clicking on off. You can see the differences. I just keep checking, and it's gently erasing. Notice that I'm on the highlighted layer, which is the very top layer looking down. Clicking it off to see the difference. Can you see the difference? It's very subtle, but it gently blurs my background, which allows my subject matter to pop. Okay? We're still looking down from the top. I want to show you all the layers now. Looking down from the top, there is our original after we scaled it, but I want to show you the very original image. Here we go. This is our original image. Original with scaling. Original rotated. Now we start to adjust contrast levels. Color correction. Levels. Adding the blurred layer to the entire image. Can you see the difference? Once again, I'm highlighting that top layer to work with it a little bit more. I want to erase a little bit more of the blur, making sure that the candlestick is sharp and clear while drawing attention to the apple on top. With a soft, blurred background and shadow. Now if we look closely, we can see the difference of each layer, of each tool, of each correction that I made from the original. There's the window of our blurred layer. Here's the window that allows us to see the apple. And there's our base apple image. There is our base apple image after the corrections. Then I have an added background layer that improves the background. And then I have a blurred layer that softens the background and highlights the apple. Now there's a little edge here on the blurred layer that needs to be pulled over because we can just see a little bit of softness on the edge. Notice how I'm just using the smudge tool to pull the background off the edge of the canvas so that there's a nice edge. There was a soft edge due to the blur. I'm simply pulling nice solid image to the edges of the complete image. Now we can click on and off and see the difference of the blurred background to the sharp background. And I'm checking to see if I like the apple or if I want to change something. I think I want to change my apple a little bit. So I'm working with that layer, duplicating it. I'm calling it Apple Readjust 1. Because I think I want to change the levels of my apple. It's a little dark in the shadow areas, so I'm going to go to my adjustment, levels, and watch what I do. I'm going to start just looking ever so closely to see if I can brighten up the shadows and make the apple pop just a little bit more. Notice the difference. Subtle, but it really changes the brightness of the apple. Still going to just continue adjusting slightly to see if there's something that just really makes the mark. I'm just adjusting slightly to hit the mark visually. There, I think I like it there. Okay, now I'll show you the difference we just made. I just adjusted through levels from that to this. See the difference? The apple is popping. We can see more detail in the apple. It's brighter. The shadows are still soft. The background is still soft and bright. Now the apple is a little brighter, very sharp, and hopefully it is where your eye is drawn in the image. Now I'm going to save as the JPEG that we discussed, because the JPEG file is the one that you will send me every Tuesday when we have an assignment due. So we save as, go down to the format, go to JPEG. We want it to be at the maximum setting of 12. All the other settings are fine, and click. We now have that saved in our appropriate folder on our computers. Now let's go check the image size. There we go. 10.037 by 15.097 at 300 pixels per inch. Our mode is RGB, and these are all the specifications that are required by our client for our projects. Here's the original, here's our final. The original, the final. It's a matter of personal opinion whether it's an improvement or not, but you can at least see the tools available in Photoshop to work an image that might be compromised into something acceptable for a client.